Requesting connection. Established. Encrypted. We're live. The show you've been asking for. Advice, technology, and community. Linux first, all others second. This is Ask Noah.
Live from Ask Noah Show Studios, the Ask Noah Show starts right now. This is the show we came to do all the things on Linux they said couldn't be done and take your questions on how to do the same. Joining me, my co-host, Mr. Steve Ovens. Welcome in, sir.
Good evening, Noah. How's it going tonight?
We're coming in hot. Coming in hot. All right. Are you good jumping right into feedback?
Why not?
Our first email comes in from Craig. Craig writes in and says, "Hi guys, I wrote in a couple weeks back about HexOS. Here's currently where I'm at. Goals. I'd like self-hosted file storage, self-hosted picture storage that could eliminate the need to pay Apple. Family is going to stay on iOS. I'm still currently debating between Image and Piwego. I want to self-host Home Assistant, and I'm willing to set that up on a separate Red Hat or a Ubuntu server. I'd like to have a Jellyfin server for backup of my own DVD Blu-ray collection, and I like the idea of snapshots being able to easily replace failing drives. I'm a visual learner. I prefer a graphical user interface. I'm still in the beginning stages with the command line. I find myself having to look up commands more often than I'd like. I wish my memory was better, but right now, I don't know that I want to self-host. TrueNAS and CasaOS allow me to load up a bunch of self-hosted programs that are easy to find what I like and what I don't like. I really want to have a GUI dashboard that I can access all of the self-hosted programs. I'd also like access for a few family members. The hardest part is access outside of my home network. I don't want to expose my whole home network, just what is necessary. Maybe my understanding of Hex is off, but it seems like it will set things up with remote access in a more secure way than my knowledge currently allows. I'm hoping to set up two-factor authentication and try other things to increase security as needed. Maybe there's a GUI landing page that would allow me to access multiple self-hosted programs on an Ubuntu server. I'm just not aware of what I'm looking for. Thanks again for the great show, Craig." So, Steve, you probably recall Craig writing in earlier in the program and asking for our help trying to get a self-hosted system set up. Now, one of the things we had recommended to him in the past is we said, hey, Craig, maybe you want to take the simplicity, really complicated ideas are good ideas that just haven't had enough time to distill down into something elegant. And so our suggestion, I think the first time around, was maybe go back to something a little bit more basic, a little bit more simplistic. It sounds, if I'm reading Craig's email correctly, that his desire would be to stay the path, not necessarily because of simplicity, but because he wants the graphical user interface, and that's more approachable to him. So I guess I'll start here, Steve. Would you tell me that if somebody came to you and said that they were primarily interested in administrating the system with a graphical user interface, does that change your perception on where you would say ordinarily, no, you should understand all of the underlying technology and understand how to work its way up? Or would you say, yeah, in this case, if you know what Docker is and you know what CasaOS is and you want to use CasaOS as a graphically friendly way to get Docker containers up and running on your system, have at it, Haas?
Yeah, I suppose the important part here is you know how to deal with it when it breaks. Not if it breaks, when it breaks. If that's the case, then sure, there's no problem with making informed decisions. The problem that I have is when people, including myself, it bites me whenever I adopt something and I don't go and actually understand the thing that I've adopted, right? If I get a black box and then the black box doesn't work, I have to just shrug and say, I don't know what it's doing, and move on my way. And maybe that's okay, or maybe it's something you've come to rely on and now the pressure's on.
Okay, so let me put this on you. What in the end is stuff like HexOS 4, if not for the people like Craig who say, I want this thing, but I don't want to manage it from the command line. I wish to manage it all from a fancy little web UI. If it's not for people like Craig, what would be the target audience for something like this?
I think, honestly, it's for the people that have a good understanding of what it is that they're trying to achieve, and they just want to automate the process of doing a thing they already know what they're doing.
Maybe providing something available for other people cumulatively to be able to administrate. So, for example, you've got your wife or your husband or your kids, and you're, hey, let's go in and do all this. Let's go do all of this thing. Instead of me just setting it up and you all running it, I'll give you some insight as to what things are running, that sort of thing. And so it's maybe a good thing to have on top once you have the basics down. But you and I it sounds like you and I would both gravitate towards the idea of, listen, if you really want to get into self-hosting, if it's intimidating to you, that's okay. It's never not okay to not know something. That's perfectly fine. Where there should be, what should be your caution flag is if the curiosity to learn that thing or to dig into that thing or to explore further isn't there, then you might want to ask yourself, you don't have to necessarily tell us, but you might ask yourself, why do I want to do this? Why do I want to self-host? Because the benefits of self-hosting are all there, right? The data security, the ability to have access to your own stuff, the fact that nobody can take the rug out from under you, all the things we talk about, those are all true. At the same time, you've got to balance that with the fact that there isn't a support department. There isn't somebody coming to do maintenance every so often. And while we can put a really nice web UI in front of it, in the end, it's going to fall down on Craig to be able to run the thing. And so, yeah, I mean, I still think we would come back to this might be a really great idea to throw on a machine and say, do I want to install Nextcloud? Do I want to use it? Do I want self-hosted picture storage? And do I like Image or do I like Piwego better? I'm going to give a shot at setting up Home Assistant and we'll see how that runs. For that sort of stuff, maybe this is excellent as kind of a research and development box. But I think if you go to put something on the planet that you're going to tell your friends, your family, and yourself, I'm relying on this, I don't know that I would go this route. And I'm not sure even under the guise of I'm really looking for a friendly web UI, I'm still not sure I get there with Casa OS. Now, here's a twist. I have absolutely had clients tell me, yeah, you know what, Noah, what we'd really like is we like this Linux thing that you and your open source geeks are all really fascinated by. What I really want is the ability to pull up my iPhone here and pull up and be able to see what's going on. I've had that conversation before. Interestingly enough, at Summit, not this year, but last year, that was the big thing, right? Oh, system administration from your phone. Red Hat's got you covered. And so when I see, hey, I'm looking for a web UI or a GUI approachable way to do things, my mind immediately gravitates towards Cockpit. And I say to myself, top of mind, if I were looking for a thing to solve this problem, I'd be looking at Cockpit modules. How do you feel about Cockpit and Cockpit modules?
I tend to really like Cockpit. And I think that's a good example of where if you have an understanding of what you're doing, Cockpit saves you a lot of time, right? So you and I both are fairly heavy into the libvirt world, for example. Mm-hmm. I 100% use Cockpit to manage some of the functions of the remote VMs that I have on various servers. So again, that's because you know generally what it's doing and how to fix it when it breaks, and it's not some big mystery. So I tend to really like Cockpit, and the other thing that is nice about Cockpit is there's usually a way for you to figure out what it is that Cockpit is doing under the hood.
It will tell, yeah, it will tell you. So, as it relates specifically for managing virtual machines, I distinctly remember, in fact, I think it might have even been on this show, you and I were talking, and we were talking about managing things with Cockpit and Cockpit machines versus using Virt Manager. And I very distinctly remember both of you and I going, yeah, no, there's like half the stuff that you need to do isn't built into Cockpit yet. And so you're going to have to use Virt Manager for that. And it's like, nuts to this. We're sticking with we got a tool and it works, so we're not moving. And that was kind of our attitude. And today, as I sit here, I would tell you that I've experienced to where when you get some of the new VMs that are running with, and you're running Spice and those sorts of things, unless you're going through and tweaking the firewall rules and allowing traffic and all, you can get into this thing where you've got to enter in the SSH password 15 times, and that's not an exaggeration, to get Vert Manager to connect to all of the different things that it's bringing in. Again, unless you go and modify the rules and say, hey, can I accept? But Cockpit machines, you open the web UI, go to Cockpit, 9090, click on the thing, click on the machine, go into the console, done there. Now you're sitting in front of the computer. So it's gotten real nice. And the thing that I like about it is it doesn't really I mean, Steve and I are huge libvirt fans, partly because it just works and partly because it's available to anyone everywhere. And you could do it as simple as just running verse commands in the command line, or you can put all this fancy stuff on top of it and it doesn't care. It runs either way. But what I would tell you is you could swap out what is underneath there and keep the UI that your users or your other system administrators are using the same. And so if I woke up in Craig's shoes and I was like, well, I want to set up a server, but I definitely want a UI to manage it, I'd start with an Ubuntu server or a Red Hat server, and I would put Cockpit on it, and I would start there and see how far you get. And there are modules for managing containers. There are modules for managing virtual machines. There are modules for managing just about anything. And instead of being locked into one very specific system, you will be leveraging a whole suite and host of tools to be able to get largely the same thing done, but you'll be able to swap out the parts. So I think it will give you a more robust end product. Is that me going too far? Or is that pretty accurate, you think?
I think it's pretty close.
From the Linux Newswire newsroom, this is the Week in Review with JT.
For the week of November 17th, 2024, here's the Linux and open source news. WordPress 6.7 has been released. The Postgres team has announced the release of Postgres 17.1. pzip 10.1 is out. Digicam 8.5 has been released with improved face management. Systemd 256.8 is now available. The Linux 6.12 kernel has been released, and for those wanting a Libre blob-free kernel, the GNU Linux Libre team has released their deblobbed version of the 6.12 kernel. And the future 6.13 kernel will quadruple the work queue concurrency limit. In distro news, Q4OS 5.7 Aquarius has been released, and Red Hat Enterprise Linux 9.5 has been released, with a new pseudo system role and Podman 5.0.
Mike McGrath. He is the VP of Core Platform Engineering and a guest this hour on the Ask Noah Show. Mike, welcome into the program.
Hey, Noah, it's great to be here again, and I'm looking forward to the interview.
Yeah, welcome back. So some time has passed. You've been on the program before. We kind of talked about some of the drama revolving around the Red Hat and source code and those sorts of things. Mm-hmm. With a little bit of hindsight being 2020, has anything changed, or what would you say today regarding the drama that kind of unfolded around Red Hat source code?
Yeah, I think one of the big things that happened was the industry had an important conversation about the community, about source code, about the GPL definitely, and about how that all feeds into products. And so, at Red Hat, we have always had a very firm line between our products and our community side. We always make sure they have different names and they have different autonomies and different rules and things. And I think that looking back, from then to now, we've seen a lot of the fervor sort of die down. People are now kind of understanding both how the GPL works, because that was something a lot of people were confused about. And I think that, I think there's still some people that are upset, but I also think that people are more understanding about what we actually announced as opposed to what people thought we announced or had read we announced, because, the nuance in this was very important. Absolutely.
Talking a little bit about Fedora, the next version of RHEL that's what it's going to be cut from. Can you talk a little bit about what's exciting to you from the approach of streams branching out and taking from Fedora and those sorts of things?
Yeah, I've been at Red Hat for a very long time, and no matter what you do, anytime you bootstrap an operating system, that is a big and messy environment to work in. Sure. And so we're in that process now of figuring out what in Fedora we want. It's important to remember RHEL is only a subset of what is in Fedora, which is a much larger software set. And for us, the things that I'm excited about right now are things that are kind of core to what we've always done, enabling new and exotic accelerators. That is something that appeals to a lot of people, both in terms of making sure that they're energy efficient. We have a lot of, even internally at Red Hat, we have a lot of people that are very much on, being green and being environmentally friendly, very important to them. But also the things that these new GPUs are doing, the things that all these new chipsets are doing is very interesting to us. And while Red Hat has always had different cycles in its life of what it's working on now, it went from OpenShift and Ansible, and we are working on services as well. The thing that's exciting to me is AI. And AI looks a lot like what we're traditionally good at, but applied in a new and interesting way. And so I think it's been very energizing for the team. And certainly I've been running AI workloads locally at home as well, just to tinker with them. And being honest, for me, the barrier to entry for AI is much lower in open source than I thought it was going to be. It's much easier. And then making sure that that AI workflow is also easy to get end-to-end working, making sure the accelerators work out of the box, making sure that the different models are functioning right. That's all. There's quite a lot of tinkering that has to work to make that all happen.
It's interesting when we talk about, traditional software code, open source is fairly well understood. I have access to the source code. I can make changes to it. I can compile it. I can run it. I can share it with you. Now you have access to that same source code. Mm-hmm. With AI, it's a bit different, right? Because you have the training data, you have the raw data, you have the trained models, so there's all of these different ways, and I think it kind of means something different to everybody else. How would you define open source AI?
Well, obviously they've got the software set, like you said. That's an important part of AI. And I think what we're seeing now is kind of what we saw, I guess, through the 80s and 90s, where proprietary solutions come out very important. Some mixing and matching of open source licenses. We announced InstructLab, which has a Granite model as a backing. That's an Apache 2 license. And what I think we're seeing is us quickly learning from the lessons that we'd had in the past and rapidly going towards a state where everything is open by default. And we, at Red Hat Summit this year, we have on the expo floor this InstructLab that you can go look at, being able to contribute to that model and doing it in such a way that it can be attributed, that you can track the facts and skills where they would come from. I think we're seeing a situation where a lot of these models have at least some proprietary backing, and we're working to use an open source model to then obsolete that proprietary data so that it is a truly open source, completely repeatable solution. And I think that'll take years to happen, a few years at least. But that's, I think, where we're headed. And the academics that you see working on this, I think that research, when coupled with open source, is really powerful. I think we're going to see a lot of changes in the next couple of years.
You brought up accelerators, and the pace of AI is obviously very, very rapid. In that world, and a lot of the change happens upstream, right? Mm-hmm. So how does Red Hat keep their ear to the ground and keep their finger on the pulse of what's changing and with that pace?
Well, the one of Red Hat's superpowers is so many of our engineers are working upstream already. So they're already there hearing about this, and then we just have to listen. Like, they come tell us what's going on. They tell us what is exciting them and what is exciting others. And for us, that's how we track these things. And in the case of, maybe a little bit different in the case of IBM Research, given the special relationship that IBM and Red Hat has. But there's an entire ecosystem of software around things like PyTorch, for example, which is another one of those things that just is going to magically work. Well, not magically, but it'll work well with Red Hat because we have so many Python developers already. Like, this is something that we already just have people that have these skills that can go work on that. And it's really exciting.
Can you talk to me a little bit about the RHEL 10 Xorg to Wayland transition?
Yeah, so Xorg, Wayland, this is a controversial topic for some in the community, but it's one that we feel is needed. It's actually very expensive and difficult to maintain two, stacks like that. And Xorg's been around forever, not the oldest thing in the world, but it's been around for a long time. And as with most software setups, it's collected its set of baggage over the years. And for us, the shift to Wayland is something that we view as the future. And so once we identified it as this is where we want to end up, it was mostly a matter of figuring out how to get there. And we identified early on that it won't make sense to maintain Xorg and Wayland side by side. And so it was just a matter of figuring out when this was going to happen. We even talked about it in the RHEL 9 timeframe. And we decided RHEL 10, that seems like a good place to do it. Most of the software now works just fine with Wayland, and we're going to work with partners and everybody else to try to get the rest of it on board.
Has there been any progress with things like remote desktop on Wayland? So that's one of the things that, when you find organizations that are heavily using X, a lot of times it has to do with some sort of X magic that they're using to remote control, those sorts of things. And obviously the technology is piped there for Wayland. How's it coming along? Are there solutions for remotely remoting into a box and doing screen control?
So we continue to talk with people about. Actually, for me, it's Synergy, which is another. It's a company that allows you to share your keyboard and mouse. I'm actually a heavy Synergy user, and it was one of the reasons that took me a while to move over to Wayland. It's something we're aware of, and we're working with different companies to make sure that it will work well. But there, it's a very different system, and so getting people to migrate is challenging. It's work to do. And I think for us, being able to signal ahead of time that, hey, RHEL 10, this is where we're going, and Xorg is going to go away. It is our hope that that's a signal to others that, hey, this is going to happen. We need to take this migration seriously, especially where we have common customers in mind.
So RHEL is typically supported for 10 years, right? Does that pose any sort of impact when deciding what version to support?
Oh, absolutely. And it's not just 10 years. We don't announce it at the release time, but we often have an ELS offering as well. And so we don't always know what the ELS offering is going to be, but for RHEL 7, which is going to EOL in 2 months, we've offered an additional 4 years of ELS for that. And so for RHEL 10, we're now making decisions that we will have to live with in maybe 2038, something like that. Wow. So the timelines that we're talking about are very long. Now for customers, this can be very valuable because a lot of times an operating system upgrade, for example, that's a cost event for them.
Sure.
They're not sitting there. Many of our customers are not sitting in their office just waiting to do an operating system upgrade. That's not what they're about. And so for us, the decisions for us are very largely about where we think software is going to be, what we think our customers are going to need. Another really good example of that is what we're doing with the 32-bit. We don't think 32-bit x86 hardware is going to be around in 2038. And so that's another one that we're looking at setting by the wayside for RHEL 10, going to be only 64-bit. But it's a major consideration for us. And we have some options within the operating system. Not everything is supported identically, but it's a major consideration for us. And the other part of this is, when you get to that time frame later in the life cycle, even the kernel is very different. It becomes very difficult to backport because by the time we fork it, it's much easier in the early part of that cycle because things are pretty much the same. They're very similar. But as we get towards the later part of that life cycle, the RHEL kernel has now moved way ahead of where we forked from. And that's a big part of what Red Hat does.
Talk to me about image mode for RHEL. What is it and how is it different from UBI?
Image mode, at Red Hat Summit at least, image mode has been the thing that people have asked me about the most, the traditional RHEL customer. And so first let me talk about what we're calling package mode. Package mode is just traditional RHEL. It is exactly what you think it is. You install it usually via Anaconda. You would download your RPMs with DNF and install them. Just traditional RHEL. We just are now calling it package mode.
Okay.
On the other side of the table, we have image mode. And image mode is, the easiest way to think of it is a container that you could move around and run just like a normal container, but we've also put a kernel inside of it, which means that when installed with bootc, which is a technology that exists, you can now boot that container on a bare metal system. And it turns out this is very interesting for a lot of reasons. The technology itself, while very neat, is not a gigantic leap forward. But the thing that makes it really interesting is over the last, we'll say 5 or 10 years, an entire ecosystem has been built up around building, sharing, building containers, sharing containers, pushing them through your pipelines, CI/CD, all that. But traditional operators have been unable to use that for their host system images. That entire ecosystem is just unavailable to them. Well, with image mode, that's not the case anymore. They can use those exact same images and boot them in a production environment on bare metal, or a developer can take it and just run that container as they normally would. And we've also started to look at using it as an appliance. And so we also announced RHEL AI, which is something we can talk about too. But that's an image mode based release that is entirely focused on AI workloads. And for us, image mode, something a lot of customers have been asking for. It's got rollback functionality. We've already got it integrated into Insights. And for RHEL 9.4 customers, they can go take a look at that today. It was released last week.
Tell me about RHEL AI.
So yeah, RHEL AI was probably my favorite announcement of the summit this year. And we've had OpenShift AI for a while. This is where you could run large workloads across several systems. Well, RHEL AI, much like RHEL, is typically designed to be installed on just one system. And so if you're just getting new to AI, you want to go kind of tinker with it, you can take a look at RHEL AI. And it is a fit-for-purpose operating system. We've announced it, but it's not GA'd yet. So stay tuned. We've got some tech preview code out there if you want to go tinker with it. But basically, we're going to be designing end-to-end the most performant, automatically configured, works out of the box image that you can then download and run. Whether or not you're looking at NVIDIA or Intel or AMD, we're going to be targeting, or other workloads as well. We're going to be targeting those AI workloads so you can download this image, install it, and it will, we will guarantee the best performance that you can get out of that image.
So it isn't a package, it isn't an add-on, it's basically a self-contained operating system based on RHEL specifically for AI.
Exactly, that's exactly right. And it's a subset of RHEL content, but only for building and running AI workloads.
That's very cool. There's micro-DNF, there's micro-shift, UBI now has a micro-container, et cetera. Can you talk to me a little bit about how all these technologies tie together and specifically what Red Hat's broader strategy is for low-powered computers?
Yeah, it's a really great question. We have, for many years now, been feeling this sort of dichotomy between traditional RHEL customers and their very large server environments, big iron. We love that stuff. And then also these much smaller environments, either on edge. We've talked about Red Hat in-vehicle operating system is something else we're working on. All kinds of these new use cases that are smaller, but even these smaller systems do kind of look like the servers of maybe 5 or 10 years ago, right? When you install them, they actually don't look that different if you were to SSH into them. But still, in those environments that are outside of a data center, there is just special concerns for things like security and the attack surface of that operating system, how long it takes to do an over-the-air update. If you've got, you can imagine a fleet of delivery vehicles. If you want to push an update out to them, sometimes they're connected, sometimes not. If it's a 10 gigabyte update, that could take weeks or months to see if it worked. And then if something goes wrong, maybe that entire fleet has to come home to get it fixed. And so for us, we're trying to find that balance where we can of compatibility. We want to have a common experience for everybody. If somebody knows how to use RHEL on a server, we want that knowledge to be completely transferable to understanding their knowledge on a car or in a device on the edge. And so we're creating things like micro-DNF, like you'd mentioned, much smaller fit-for-purpose tool to install software. And then also UBI, which is our universal base image. That is a relatively small image that you can use in a container. You can always just download it. You can install more things on it if you want to make it bigger, but our goal from Red Hat's point of view is to start at a smallest known working environment so that you can just start there and then grow as you need to without pulling in things you don't need.
Just enough Linux to get you by kind of a thing.
Yep, exactly.
I love OS Tree. I want to make sure I understand correctly. At the moment, it's only available for supported edge deployments. Is that correct?
Yes, it is something you can find in RHEL for Edge and something you can find in CoreOS, obviously, under OpenShift. But there's not a lot of deployments outside of that today.
Do you see a time where we would see OS Tree available on all RHEL deployments?
OS Tree is actually a big part of the core of image mode. And so it's basically one way to think of image mode is it wraps a bunch of stuff around containers that then creates these OS trees. And so it's a different way to deploy them, but a pretty good. If OS Tree is something you're looking for, go check out image mode, and it'll do what you need it to.
So you kind of piqued my curiosity when you talked about being able to download embedded systems and working with Red Hat, across the board. Would you ever see a time when Red Hat would release some sort of a build kit, kind of a get off the ground, bootstrap, get the edge device ready to go?
Yeah, it's a good question. One of the interesting things about our edge customers is that they tend to be more sophisticated than your general purpose customer. They tend to be more willing to customize things, and they just tend to have more expertise about the actual hardware that they're dealing with. And so for us, we have Image Builder is a service that we have, and one that you can download and run on premises if you want as well. That tends to be the deployment mechanism that we're using to create these images and provide a way to install them onto the devices and things. But we've also found a lot of customers have their own custom scripts for doing this today. And so we're trying to work with customers to know what they need. Sometimes they want to use Image Builder, but they're trying to figure out what features are needed. Usually it's a different way of doing things, so it takes some time for them to do the work. And sometimes they actually they want to continue to maintain their own deployment mechanisms. And so we're trying to work with them on that. We don't want to. Red Hat is not a world domination company. We're happy to fit in where customers want us to, and that's a good example of where we're seeing a good mix from customers.
What sort of new developments have you seen that are most relevant to the organizations around you?
Well, I think a lot of people are just wanting to know what is going on with AI, definitely. And so we're trying to build our own expertise in this area. We're working with a lot of partners, and a lot of users out there still don't get it. They haven't done anything beyond ChatGPT, which, while useful, is not that helpful for them. They can't upload their secret sauce up into ChatGPT to make that work. But for the customers that are working on it, that's we're definitely looking to talk with them more. And I think the other one, just is, I think image mode is also a response that we have from a lot of customers. They definitely are in a mode where now that containers are something that they know how to use and they have a lot of expertise in, they're finding traditional package mode is just not scratching that itch in terms of integrating with their CI environments and their testing frameworks and things. It's always kind of been, I guess I'd say, these days it now feels like a sidecar compared to all the rest of their deployment workflows. And so now we've got image mode and they can do that.
So image mode, if I'm kind of putting all the pieces together, is kind of this reproducible way to spin up RHEL in a predictable way every time?
Predictable and automated, yes. And the idea is that it's very cheap to do that, so you can very quickly spin up, just as you would an application build of some kind. It's should be no more expensive to build up and test your operating system.
Talking about kind of expenses, and I'll tie it to licensing, what kind of licensing will be available for Red Hat AI? Is that something that you get, as a typical subscription? Is that something that requires something special? How does that work? Yeah,
I think we're still looking at what that subscription is going to look like. I would expect to see more news on that later in the year. But it will be, as I said, it is a subset of RHEL content, so it's definitely not going to have the exact same life cycle or cost, but we're still looking at that.
One of the things we're asking everybody this year, can you talk to me a little bit about what open source means to you personally, and what's kind of your favorite thing right now in the open source world?
Yeah, I think for me, open source just aligns very much with my values. I love the idea of transparency, being open, being accountable for the decisions that you make, and sharing. I think that is the best way to do just about anything. And so Red Hat's been a great company to work for. I think that we've had those open values since I started over 17 years ago, and it excites me when smart people get in a room and argue and complain about what the right way forward is. And certainly on an engineering front in the community, that's where the magic is happening. And so I really like that. I think the thing that excites me the most right now, what I mentioned earlier, is kind of PyTorch. I think that there's a lot of proprietary vendors out there that are learning very quickly within their own right, and I think they're all kind of looking at some of the tools out there, but PyTorch, one of them, in the rearview mirror, watching it get larger in the mirror. It's already got a huge ecosystem of tools around it. I've seen actually a lot of very intelligent developers working on it already. We're grateful to have some of them working at Red Hat as well. They're just kind of looking at it, seeing what it can do, and seeing the potential in it. That to me is going to be the one to watch. I'm very excited about it.
Mike McGrath, he is the VP of Core Platform Engineering at Red Hat, and a guest this hour on the Ask Noah Show. Mike, we appreciate the time. As always, we'll get you back on the program soon.
I love it. Thanks a lot.
So, Steve, your adventure with desktop Linux did not take a backseat this week. In fact, if anything, it went into hyperdrive. You began the process. First of all, you redid yet again. You landed on something a little bit different, and this time you're automating. talk to me a little bit about your journey. Can you tell me how you got into this week and how you wound up with a playbook that you've now published to GitHub?
So I guess this is my long-standing talk about immutable operating systems and where they fit into life. Pardon me. My desktop has started to hate going to sleep. And I suppose one of the solutions could be don't put my desktop to sleep, but that seems kind of wasteful overnight. Putting it to sleep, saving some power, as opposed to shutting it down. The challenge is that it doesn't seem to matter which desktop that I use. And I've tried a few operating systems too, like between Ubuntu and we've chronicled that in the past about what I've tried and stuff like that. They all seem to have problems with sleep. It could be my video card. It could be newer NVIDIA graphics. It could be a combination of the video card, the graphics, and the newer kernel, all that sort of stuff. But the end result is I put the computer to sleep, and most of the time it doesn't really behave as I want. So GNOME will just flat out crash, and you get that giant gray screen with the something went wrong. KDE gives me a black screen, and it takes 15 seconds or more to just crash back to the login screen. Deepin will recover fairly quickly, but it kills all of the windows. And so it's only marginally better than just shutting the computer off at night and, booting up and having to launch all the windows. So anyways, I started reevaluating what if I wipe the operating system? Should I go with immutable? Should I go with something like NixOS? All of these sorts of things. And as I was kind of walking through, the first step that I did was make a list of software that I thought was important. And then I took one of my laptops and I just installed a base version of an operating system and put those on. And then I just kind of I need this tool. I'm missing this tool. And I basically just kind of tried to use the laptop as my primary device for a week and kind of documenting which things that I needed for my job and stuff like that. And what I came away with was if I was going to go with immutable, it needed to be in a Flatpak or an app image in order for that to work. And what I found was while I ended up migrating a bunch of my applications to Flatpaks and one or two app images, I had a significant, a dozen or more things that I needed that I couldn't get in those Flatpaks, such as the VM Horizon client and other sort of things. So that kind of ruled out immutable operating systems unless I was going to go and tinker around with the RPM OS tree and inject it in there and, all that kind of stuff. So I started thinking, I tell my clients all the time, don't throw out your knowledge base, right? Try and build on your knowledge base while you're adapting to something new. And so, what do I know? Well, I know ZFS. I've been using it for almost 2 decades at this point, maybe even 2 decades. No, that's an exaggeration. Definitely not 2 decades, but getting close now. And so I thought, I know this. What can I do with this? And I started investigating, doing a ZFS on root and what's the difference between this and some operating system that I am somewhat familiar with, and that would be, like a Fedora or Ubuntu or Arch. Those are the 3 kind of main ones that I'm familiar with. And evaluating the NixOS style specifically, where it kind of does a rebuild and it essentially rebuilds your system from your configuration and wipes the other stuff away. I suppose that's a crude way of saying it builds only what is in your configuration file, and there is no trace left of anything that you have removed from your configuration file. The challenge that I had with that is I'm trying to adapt this to my work life. I don't have 1 or 2 weeks to take off my work while I'm kind of ironing out the kinks, and it's really bad for me to say, I'm sorry, Mr. Client, I'm 30 minutes late because I couldn't get Teams to work, or I didn't have, I had to go figure out how this thing works in the new operating system. Obviously, I'm not going to say that, but the point is the same as it didn't integrate well into the idea of I have to keep the lights on while I'm changing out underneath myself. So I may eventually come back to NixOS because I think that there are some interesting things about it and it solves some good problems. But because it is so new to me, it wasn't the right time for me to adopt that. So I ended up falling back to, well, let's see if we do ZFS on root.
So can you talk a little bit about, during your immutable stage, one of the things that you tried to do was to do a local cache for Flatpaks, because you're going to live this all Flatpak lifestyle, but not everything was available. And so you thought, well, I'll have to custom package a couple of things. But then you ran into the situation in which you didn't want every computer in your whole house reaching out to the internet every time there's a new package, nor did you want the packages installed on your computers to be stale. Can you talk about that rigmarole and what you ultimately decided?
So I was approaching this from the same frame of reference as I've had in the past, which is whether it's DNF or apt or something else, I can stick squid or apt cache ng or something else in front of this. And, even Steam gets in line with this. I know Steam's kind of changed their architecture recently, but there are documented ways to do this kind of caching where, I make a configuration change and one computer changes and then everybody else can have that package available to them if you want, which is different than running your own repository, right? Your own I did that back in the day for sure, back before I discovered things like caching servers. And I thought, I'm not going back to that. So I didn't want to spin up my own FlatHub repo because then I have to worry about keeping the repo in sync and some other stuff like that. And it eats a lot more disk space than I need, right? At the end of the day, when I was evaluating what things I'm going to install from FlatHub, I had like 12 things plus whatever drivers or things that it pulls in with it. And I ran into challenges putting a cache in front of it. So when I tried to put Nginx in front, I got it to work once, and then the next day I came back and I started getting HTTP 421 errors. So I'll be honest, I know pretty much nothing about Nginx. So I was like, well, I'm going to transport this into Apache. I've got lots of experience there. I had the same experience with Apache. It worked in one test and then continued to fail after that. And I tried Squid and all these other sorts of things. And ultimately, the challenge that I have is that my route to FlatHub from where I sit in the world is very, very slow. So stealing a little bit of my own thunder, the playbook that I wrote to rebuild my desktop, install ZFS on root, then put all the packages on, do my partitioning, install all of the stuff, and reboot happens faster than installing the 7 Flatpaks that I have chosen for the desktop.
Wow.
And that's just a function of like, I have really good pipe to the Arch repos and a really bad pipe to FlatHub. And so while I was trying to dev on this, it was taking me forever to get past the Flatpak stuff, to the point where I didn't even publish that section of the playbook because I wasn't comfortable thinking that it was going to be successful, because it took so long to I hit a problem, then I'd have to start over. And of course it didn't use the local cache. I don't know what's up with that, but it would just go down and pull out the Flatpak again from FlatHub instead of using whatever was on the local system. And so I'm sure that's something I did. 100% I did something when I was tinkering around with trying to get it to use local cache. But I didn't want to sit down. My purpose was not to troubleshoot FlatHub. My purpose was to install an application so I could do work.
So can you tell me why, you said you've been down the road of hosting a repo before. Why wouldn't that be an option? It seems like that would be a very straightforward way to get all of the information into one place and avoid having all your clients have to reach out to the internet.
So there's a few challenges with Flatpaks in specific. So as we are probably all aware, they're fairly large, or if they're not large, they have large dependencies, right? So you install Firefox and it, because it can use acceleration, then goes and grabs the NVIDIA driver, and then it grabs, 7 or 8 things that are not just the Flatpak itself, like the Firefox Flatpak. And what that means is that you end up having a compounding repo. And I did not want to mirror, like Flatpaks are large. I can't even imagine what it would take to mirror FlatHub specifically. And I only wanted a dozen packages maybe. So pulling down all of FlatHub for a dozen packages didn't seem worth it. Now, I found one Reddit post once that a guy said he used the USB create option for Flatpak, which I have absolutely used for Endless OS, where you basically stick them on a USB key, and then when you plug it into the computer, it recognizes the fact that it's got Flatpaks there, and you can access them again. And he said he used that method and some network magic and made it work, but he had like a 2-line answer, and it was a couple years ago. So I haven't chased that down, but ultimately space is a concern, bandwidth is a concern. Like I can't even imagine, like, because I don't know what the space is, how long is it going to take me to sync down the FlatHub repo?
So a number of different challenges there. Ultimately, you wound up with this playbook. One of the things that you did that I thought was interesting, you broke it up into stages. So for somebody who maybe they've heard us talk about Ansible before, they've heard it referenced, largely they know it's an orchestration technology. How would you describe an Ansible script to somebody who's never played with one before?
It's a declarative way to tell the system how it should look by the time that it's done. And it uses a system of modules, or I guess you could call them plugins, in order to understand how to accomplish a thing. So for example, there's a module for doing partitioning, and there's a module for specifically editing files and all of these sorts of things. And so you tell it, if you want to edit a file, you tell it, I want a line in the file. It should go after this file, and the line should look like this. And it will go and do that thing. And the next time that it runs, it'll look at the file and say, oh, that line is still, like, that line already exists. I don't have to do anything, and it moves on its way. So it's a declarative way to get to an end state.
Why did you choose to break it up into different stages? Why not just have everything all in one big gigantic YAML file, and then the whole thing is all in one file, and it's very easy to go through and very easy to read because it's all there in one place?
So I'm not an Ansible consultant. I'm sure that my Ansible colleagues at Red Hat would probably do this a different way. But I do a lot of Python development, and best practice in Python is you split out your classes into their own modules. And further to that, you split up their functions in order to reduce complexity. So if you've got something that's over like 50 lines, best practice is that you split that out because it's probably too complex. And so I took the same approach with Ansible playbooks, where I kind of broke them out into stage 1 is this is preparing the Arch ISO environment, and stage 2 is doing the actual installation inside the Arch C8 root. And each one of those have kind of like subcomponents. So for example, install ZFS. If you've decided to install the desktop with a Boolean there, so there's a desktop Boolean true or false, then it installs things that you probably want on a desktop, like Firefox and Nautilus, or, take your pick. Then there's also which type of desktop do you want? Cinnamon, KDE, GNOME, those sorts of things. And depending on which one you pick, it starts to kick off the Cinnamon playbook, which is the one that I've actually developed. I just kind of left stubs in for the other ones. So largely it's following the Python mentality, not the Ansible mentality. So I didn't make it a role. I just simply tackled this like I would a Python program.
I want to talk a little bit about the role. First of all, I think if you poked one of your Ansible colleagues, I think you'd find that the same best practices that are working in Python are likely the same things that work well at Ansible. But the roles thing, and specifically breaking out into different tasks. Now, maybe you'll tell me, well, no, that's you're picking and choosing vernacular. It's all kind of the same thing. But where is the time to break out like different tasks, right? So here's the thing that installs the software from here. That's one task. Here's the thing that installs the software from there. That's another task. Here's the thing. And so that allows you to kind of mix and match to go between to where you would say, like, now I can modularize and say, hey, when I have the desktop role, it's doing these, it's doing these packages or these collection of tasks. When I'm doing those collection of tasks, was there an intentional decision to say, no, I want this all together in a stage 1, stage 2, or is it a function of just, it's to scratch my own itch and I'm trying to get one thing done here, and so there's no reason to make everything modular and break everything out into super little things because I have no need or plan or desire to ever leverage it that way. I'm always going to use it in this stage 1, stage 2, and you would just tweak it for the packages you want on your machine. So
part of this is the challenge with the way that Arch gets installed. There's probably, we were talking before the show, there's probably some creative ways to solve this. But for people who haven't dug into the nitty gritty of what happens when you do an Arch install, essentially, once you've partitioned the disks, it mounts them in a place. And then it creates an Arch CH root into that spot and then installs a bunch of packages in it. The challenge there is the playbook runs from outside of the CH root, and it becomes kind of difficult to continue a play between outside and inside the CH root. It's not impossible, but it becomes a lot more complicated. And at the end of the day, I took a couple of swings at it, but my purpose was not to make a zero-touch deployment. My purpose was to make the deployment easy. And so I have 2 wrapper shell scripts, one that kicks off the stage 1, which is outside of the Arch CH root, and one that kicks off stage 2. And so ultimately, I'm running 3 commands. I run shell script 1, then I type the Arch CH root command, which I suppose I could add into the shell script now that I'm actually thinking about it, if I wanted to take that step out. And then I run the next shell script. And by the time that's finished running, the shell script is simply doing a little bit of stuff that needs to happen before Ansible runs. So for example, outside of the CH root, you actually have to install Ansible before you can run it. And so the shell script installs Ansible, then runs the playbook. Inside the CH root, Ansible does this thing where it will fail if you are trying to, say, use a module that it doesn't think exists on the system. Now, even if you install the module in your playbook before you go to try and use it, the pre-flight check will choke and say it doesn't exist. So you don't even get to the point where you can install it, and the playbook just dies. So the second shell script installs the Ansible module that I need for doing the AUR stuff, and then kicks off the playbook.
Interesting. Very, very interesting. So one of the other things that hit you this week that was of note to me, you landed on Cinnamon. That is an interesting choice for a desktop environment. How have you liked it so far?
So I blame you for this. Noah, in our kind of personal chat, is always going on about how he likes to grab the Endeavor OS ISO and click his way through an install.
I'm lazy.
And I needed something for troubleshooting, and I wanted a lightweight desktop. And I was like, oh, Cinnamon's on the list. I'll pick that one because it's been years. Like, I used to put Linux Mint on my in-laws' computers. And so I'm sort of familiar with Cinnamon, but I grabbed that one. And the Endeavor OS theming on Cinnamon, I was like, wow, this is really nice. So I thought, what the heck, I'll give it a shot.
We'll continue to get updates from you, Steve. I'm excited to see how this unfolds, and I, as I'm sure I speak for a lot of people, say I appreciate the fact that you're continuing to trudge forward on the Linux desktop. Music in our ears means we're out of time. I thank you for joining us. We record the show every Tuesday. You can join us in the chat room by going to /GeekLab or #GeekLab:/LinuxDelta.com. Get the show notes, podcast.asknoahshow.com. We're back next Tuesday, 6 p.m. Central, asknoahshow.com.